Hello, it's Flex and you're watching Build Series Sydney. Today I'm joined by an amazing Australian singer-songwriter, Ziggy Alberts. In just a few years, he's gone from busking in Byron to selling out world tours. It's a big deal. Please make him feel welcome just one more time. Ziggy, do I have questions for you? Since you dropped Laps Around the Sun, it's been onwards and upwards and forward momentum, tour after tour. How are you feeling?
Today, feeling wonderful. Yeah.
Wonderful?
Yeah. No,
is that because you're in the company of amazing people?
Yeah, it's because I mean, we've got water, we've got a couch. No, it's very good. Today's really good. It's been a massive year, and you just have to try and take these little power ups every now and then in between the traveling. I think the amount of traveling this year has been huge, but to be at the end of this year with so much traveling and still kind of relatively human, it's good.
How are you managing? How are you staying relatively human? Because I know for the average person who's probably not working as hard as you are in this present moment, we all want to take far more breaks than you have. So what are you doing? Are you meditating? Are you watching Netflix?
So I think something that I noticed is I came back 2.5 weeks ago from Europe, and before that I was in America, and so the time zone thing's really big, and that's like an ongoing. How do you do something when the human body hasn't really had time to catch up with how quickly we're moving through? Okay, this week you're sleeping when you should be awake, and vice versa. I find probably for the most part, though, I spent like a week in the office with the girls, kind of doing the work that I had to do, you know, leading up to this tour on the computer. And honestly, it's like I see what people do week to week in their jobs, and I'll take my job. Like people, I think everyone works really hard, and you just have your strengths, and I have to kind of go out on stage and be pretty focused and very open and active late at night. That's my thing. But it's a continuous process of finding out what works for you and why, because you have these ideas about this is the routine that should work for me, but it is. For me, I've just found like it's meditation, a bit of yoga, just little things, downtime, whether it's just like reading a book, doing a bunch of journaling. Just being healthy is what makes touring, something a little more enjoyable. So I'm not much of a party animal.
Yeah.
Sadly, I'd be more fun, but no, I just kind of just keep out of trouble, and have been at 120 shows, over 120 shows by the end of the year from December 2018 to this December. So there's been, when you're touring that much, and I think it's probably true for people as they grow professionally in their career, you actually party less than the people who continue to party. You can't do it. I don't know how people do it. Like, hats off to people who do genuinely give it a crack. I'm half a beer and then I'm done. Yeah.
And that's fair. But it also seems like you keep a good perspective as well, because throughout, that the answer you gave me, you were very aware of how great your life is and the amazing things you get to do. So that's really awesome to hear. I want you to put into perspective how hectic 120 shows over a year is. That not only is it probably like one show every 3 or so days, but you're traveling to and from, you're still writing music, you're still in the studio. Like, what do your days actually look like?
That's a really good question. On tour, it kind of depends on where we are. So in Europe and in America, I was in a tour bus for the first time, like a sleeper with bunk beds, and that was a really it made all the shows we had to do. The first European tour this year was 28 shows in 45 days, and so there was at one point I think we did 10 shows in 12 days, and I would opt to never do that again. It was like, woke up, did a show in Germany, then played the next show in France, and we're in Italy, and then back to Spain, then back to Switzerland. This is like every night. I'd say probably my particular situation comparative to other artists, because I'm independent and I work closely with my team, I'd say, and my personality. Every artist is different, and so for me, my days generally on tour play out like wake up, if we turn up, usually at the moment it literally has been, which is just as of this year, where we're in a different city, every night. That wasn't up until this year, and so wake up, find a good little brekkie spot, find where there's a yoga studio, like really cliche, and then try and plan the day around that. I usually have like a couple of hours that I do at the computer, answering very few emails, but kind of the girls have stuff that only I can do as the artist, and so I just try and attend to that during the day. But it also makes me feel like I'm not waiting till 8 p.m. or 9 p.m. to like that for me would probably be a bit daunting just for my personality. So like I'm happy that I have things to do during the day and I keep myself busy and just try and we're really lucky in America and in Canada to do a lot of hiking this summer, which was awesome, you know, to kind of be out in Boulder, for example, like somewhere like that where I'd never been before, and to be hiking these ridiculous places, like, yeah, I can't complain. So I'm busy for probably a normal personality, but for me, yeah, that's my days how they play out on tour. Finish a show, hopefully don't take many calls after the show, but sometimes we have to because, you know, the girls are working early in the morning or late at night, and vice versa for me. Go to bed and just do it all again.
Whoa. And when you're on the road for this long, it's intense. Like I can't even pretend to relate in any way because, you know, for the average person, when they're working, you're working. And then when they're having their time off, you're working. And then when they're having extra time off, they're seeing you play. So you're still working. So it's really hard to comprehend. But when you think about what it's like being on the road for this long, where is home for you now? Do you make it back to the sunny coast very often, or home is wherever there's a yoga studio?
You have really good questions. You've done your back back catalogue on this. No. I'm like, wow, okay. Home. And I take that really seriously. I'm like, where is home?
Of course, though, yeah.
It's look, I think what I'm really lucky with being on the road this much. I'm really lucky that I travel with a lot of friends and do travel with family. And when I get back, I work with family. Like I do work with a lot of with family typically. And so I'm really lucky that there is always kind of our crew. We can turn up anywhere and we have like our place that we really enjoy being together. I haven't been still enough to have the answer to that question, but I think that you can. It's certainly how you feel in that place. Like I've learned over the years that you can be in like a really beautiful place and be very unsettled. And so for me, I think it's more of a focus of how can I be here in Sydney today and be making the most of being here in Sydney, you know, for this, you know, for the next week before the show. How can I make, and I think it's just little things for us. It's like going to that little cafe spot and doing, you know, writing some lyrics or working on some other stuff. And that's the things that you do at home. That's the things I do when I go visit my parents on the Sunshine Coast. That's what I do at home. And so it's about those little habits and those things. And again, it's just learning what kind of settles you down and what truly makes you happy, because I have these ideas sometimes that I want to go on these really big adventures after tour, you know, like go out in the middle of nowhere without the phone and go on a big surf trip, for example. But what I'm learning now as I am maturing a little, that what I really like to do after tour is just go somewhere I don't have to hop in the car.
Wow.
Walk to the beach. And it's like walk to the beach, go to a little coffee shop, catch up with some friends and family. And like so it's just about listening to yourself. And that's an ongoing process for sure.
And it's almost remembering that the times in which you don't take those little breaks every now and then just to do the things you want to do, it adds on to, you know, any emotional exhaustion you might feel after the tour when you're like, oh, I should feel relaxed, but I never, you know, played that thing or went to that place that I wanted to do. But to avoid making tour sound like a downer, because it's absolutely not, what is the best part about it for you?
You turn up to somewhere you've never been, you know, which you don't. This place is, I woke up one morning on the tour bus and opened the window and we were somewhere between Boulder and Aspen and in America. And I looked out the window and, for example, like there was this lake high up in the mountains and there was like, for some reason, a yacht in there. Like it was a big old lake kind of thing. But, you know, it's like the morning sunrise and you're driving through these incredible, you know, like canyons where the road's passing through. And then there's just places that you would never have ended up otherwise. Like, it's not like you plan, okay, I'm going to go to Aspen. Like so you kind of end up in places you didn't plan to. And then when you get there, you get to go do something, you know, like I've always traveled primarily through touring. And so that's like what an incredible thing that I turn up and travel to these places, and my job is not just how to get there or how to stay there, you know, like where sometimes And again, hats off to people who are going on massive traveling, expeditions, and they'll work whatever job they have to. I get to turn up and do music. And I think to be able to do something really special for your job every time you hop on stage, like you have an opportunity to be honest with people. You have an opportunity to, like, I could get on stage and I could be like laughing or crying and everyone would be happy. That's like, I get to just be myself, and that's that's why you keep doing it. That's why even when there's the time zone stuff is hard, or being away from home, or sleeping on a moving vehicle every night, which I do kind of like actually. Now being still in the bed is a bit weird, but that's the stuff that you. That's the stuff that every time, no matter how tired you are, how long you've been on the road, you get on stage and you have those moments, those things you can't kind of. There's nothing like them, So that's I love touring, and it's not me who's I'm the one who's pushing with my team. They're like, wow. Zig, you're going to do less shows next year, and I'm like, what? What are you saying? Because and it is a long game. 120 shows I'd say this year. It's been like an amazing process, and I say like I won't do 120 next year because I think then that's just kind of setting yourself up for failure in terms of it's just a bit hard to keep on top of everything, and so. No, I look forward. Just kind of still, and probably those numbers of shows and how much you tour changes, because when I was 19 in my old van, just flying around the country, like I did way more than 120 shows a year. I might have done like, I would have easily done. I mean, some weeks I did like 8 shows.
So you've been breaking records. 120 is nothing.
And so like 100, the difference is now is it's so, international. Yeah. And so that's at different times in your career and your life. You just kind of have to figure out what works for you. And I think something that I kind of came to realizing, I talked with my team about, and mostly you have to come to it in yourself, is that like what, for example, Tash has done to get to where she's at, and like what Ed Sheeran did to get to where he's at, is that like I don't even understand that level, of how much like those people are like music, like that's it. And whereas like I really love music, but I've got other things I'm really passionate about. And so I think you have to decide whether you want to, conquer the whole world, for example. And I don't want to conquer the whole world. I'm happy to, half the world will do just fine. And so I think you have to decide those things before, and that's because if you want to do what to the level that Tash has gotten to, and if you want to do, for example, where Ed has gotten to, like that takes a different level of dedication again, and so you just have to decide and take what comes with that, and where you want to go and how hard you're willing to go for that,
But how do you strike the balance? Because it seems like you know yourself quite well, and you know that the Ziggy you are doesn't want to be spending 365 days on a bus touring. And so did you get to that point through doing it and realizing, or had it always been a consideration for you that you had other interests?
I think music came, like kind of surfing, for example, and writing actually was what came first. I was interning at a surf magazine. I was doing like freelance work at like 13 or 14 for this little local surf magazine, doing these little pieces in the back of the mag. And then it's kind of always been hand in hand. But to be fair, like I've kind of hit the wall a couple times. Like you kind of meet where you've pushed it too hard, because depends, again, it's only me at the end of the day, because of the way my career has been built, that like if I say to my team, I say, hey, I'm taking some time off, like again, they're the ones saying, hey, I think you should play less shows, or I don't know if you should play that many shows. So you just have to kind of, like we talked about a bit before, I think it's a matter of finding what works for you, and if I didn't do 120 shows this year, I wouldn't have known. Maybe I would have looked at 120 shows and said, that's totally feasible every year. Book, sign me up. Whereas
2025, 120, let's do it again.
Yeah, exactly, right? Yeah, exactly. And so I think that, you just got to pick and choose, and that just takes, you got to see it year by year, honestly, when it comes to it. You have to make plans. We have to make plans well ahead now, but it's been an absolute wealth. This is the first year that I haven't been at all driving myself on my own tour. The first year. So that's been a big change. There's the first year in a bus where you're sleeping on the bus. Like that stuff, we didn't know how that would be. And so I think, just getting the experience on the road is kind of what dictates where you choose to go next.
Yeah, I feel that. And like we mentioned before, you're not just touring when you're on tour, you're also writing music, recording music, and also recording music videos. So you've got your new one out, or your latest one called Intentions. Tell us more about how that came to be. Are you really involved in that creative process?
Intentions was, I really believe, and I've done this early on in my career as well. There's one song called 4 Feet in the Forest where I'm not a dancer. Would like to be.
There's still time.
Is there still time? Okay, cool. Still moments for that. And for that music video, I learned like kind of some contemporary dance. Like learned how to dance, work with a choreographer and this dancer Zephyr Jackson, and did this whole clip for one of these songs. And I'd really like to challenge the narrative around what you can do as a folk musician. You know, because typically it's not learn how to dance for your music video. And so for Intentions for the video, it was a real, that was like a big stretch for me. Like I felt really vulnerable in that, you know, particularly not even having a microphone. Like once you have a mic stand, at least I have something to work off. I'm familiar with that. But when it was just me and Clint, the director, really, you know, helped kind of push me in a healthy way with that. And it was just something I was creatively wanted to have that direction and have something that was, I guess, for the lack of a better word, probably more pop. But again, because I'm trying to continue to push myself, like when something scares you, it's like, why? And maybe it's because you just got to try it out. And there was so much I learned from doing that music video, or even going to New York and recording Intentions. Like it was a really good way to continue to like stretch the mold of like, where do I fit? Because I am like a singer-songwriter, like that's my thing, and I'm trying to not just be like someone who's just a folk musician or just this and just that, and it was a big stretch, to be honest, with Intentions, because a lot of people like associate my songwriting, as much as I love it when my songs are just about, you know, riding waves with the dolphins and being out underneath the stars. That's a very important part of my life when I get the chance.
Yeah.
But I also now am on tour and have these other things that come with it. And so in the endeavor to continue to be honest about the things that go on in my life, because that's kind of where my music comes from, I had to be honest about the things that were changing. And that whole process made me feel incredibly vulnerable, but it feels really valuable to have done it and to continue to like push and not be scared to kind of break out of your own mold.
Hearing how you navigated doing something that was uncomfortable with you with so much like joy and trust in people around you is a testament to what you've done so far. I mean, you're 25, you're an independent artist, you've released 5 studio albums. Like, I just feel like I could put a side by side of you and the industry and to tell people that you're doing crazy, amazing things. And so being independent is not unusual, but usually independent artists don't amass the success you've had in the time that you've done it. So what encouraged you to stay independent? Because clearly labels they're on your back.
Yeah, I'm a big, for a start, I think something, I'd say early days, I was quietly more anti-establishment, I'd say, like in my own way. But now I think as you grow up a little, like you start to see that it's not right or wrong to be independent or to be signed to a big label. You just have to know what's right for you as an artist and like what you're willing to do, because you have to be mad. Like you have to be like a couple screws loose to want to be independent and remotely successful, because it involves so much work, you know, not just for me. So last year it kind of got to that crossroads point where I can't believe it was last year. It feels like it was years ago. Last year when we started Common Folk Records, me and my kind of my family management team, and at that point I was really close to signing, you know, at least overseas with a record company, and I kind of just had this niggling feeling of like we'd come so far to do that, you know, and I do like, and I will and always will and have to credit the work of my team. Like I am involved in a lot, but like the work that like my family and friends do at Common Folk Records is like they are making, particularly now, like all the things I'm passionate about come true. And I think that's something I really want to give clarity. Like I'm heavily involved in the decision making, but as for like the really hard stuff that goes on behind the scenes in any management, in any record label, I really credit them for that, because there's actually only so much I can do on the road when I'm touring, and they're really good with that. So I'm really, really lucky in that sense. We just kind of got to that point as at that time there was only 3 of us on the the management team. Like outside of me being the artist, and it just, I think I look to people like Chance the Rapper, for example, which again is cross genre, but like the fact that he'd achieved so much is kind of like, well, do we have to? And I think that it was such a clutch decision, but it was the best one. One of the most pivotal ones we made was staying independent and starting our own label. And I think that something my dad says to me is there's a level of like hope in it, is when somebody sees that, you can actually sell a tour with 32,000 people coming in advance as an independent artist, as your own promoter. It kind of sets like that's possible. And there's people that I look to, I looked, far and wide and close to home, that inspired me to go, oh, it's possible. And that's something I think that it makes for healthy competition amongst the whole music industry, when it's like, oh yeah, it's possible to be independent and succeed in these ways, and it's possible to be signed to a label and succeed in these ways. It's none of the options are bad. You just have to pick what works for you as an artist. But no artist, at least now I feel like for what we've achieved, it's like no artist should feel like that isn't possible. And there is not just me. There's so many examples if you start looking across the board of people who do it differently and do it really well.
And knowing that, being independent or being signed is an option that works for both people, or no, not both people, an option that works depending on who you are and what you do. Do you have any tips for someone who wants to follow in your footsteps and stay independent or potentially run a family label?
You have to get along with your family.
Yeah.
For sure. And you have to, if you don't get along with them, which you won't all the time, you have to be willing to argue with them. There's something that I've had people say to me who are like a bit outside of my circle, who will be like, oh, like it's really good you work with family because, at least they're not people who just tell you what you want to hear. And I sit there and I'm like, sometimes I wish that was more the case, but by the by, no. I have like the most, when you work with family, but I feel the same, like I've got some friends that are almost family now as well, that you work closely together. So I just mean that those long-standing relationships, and have probably the biggest key piece of advice I'd say is look to the people, or consider the people that are interested in what you're trying to share,
right,
before it's something that's a cash grab. That's like being like really brutal, but I mean, it's easy for someone to say, oh yeah, we just love what you do, when it's doing really well. But if someone is willing to be involved at a time where it's like you play to 15 people a night at house shows, that's an important, really valuable person in your life. Who you work with or who you don't, those people are really valuable in your life. And I'd say that those people often also care about more than just the success of your career, and that's something really, really integral. And that's something that's really hard in a big company, because, well, they've got 110 artists, and it's really difficult to care for 110 people on that level, And so I think finally, because when I did my first show in Melbourne, my first ticketed show for myself was 100 people, which was a lot at the time. This was 2014, in probably like or March, April kind of thing, 2014. And I did this backyard show. It was freezing because it was Melbourne, but it didn't rain, so it was really good. Yeah. And and to play to 100 people at that time was like a big step up for me, and also to kind of turn up somewhere for the first time, play to 100 people. But I didn't play to those 100 people and go, how do I get to 12,000 people? It wasn't even something I looked at. I was just really happy to be playing 100 people. And when I was playing in Germany for the first time and there was 30 people, it wasn't a gimmick. I just was genuinely thought that was incredible. And I didn't even look to how was I going to connect the dots between here and there, because I think if you just play an honest performance to 30 people, there might be 60 people there next time. And if you do that again, and you're there and you're present, there might be 150 people next time. And that's how it's just been. I've had 5 years going back to Melbourne, and sure, it's pretty crazy. Like it's now 12,000 people in the next show, but it wasn't 100 people and 12,000 people, and it wasn't something magic. I just kept going back, and if anything, in Melbourne in particular, it's always been like I have to step up again, and so it's always been like this kind of a little bit nerve-wracking moment, and I'll say that on stage, and we'll get through it together. You know, I think that feeling of that's something that I never looked to, is how the heck am I going to get to there? It was like, no, this is good, and this is what I need to focus on now. And I think that's what's made it possible to get to this point.
Yeah. Gotta have people on your team who care. And I guess like if you're surrounded by empathy and understanding, then the knowledge of the industry will come later. I mean, it's so ever changing anyway. You can't get a hold of it and be like, I need to be here because that's where the professionals are. Like you learn as you go.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, that you learn as you go, because I think probably the biggest secret that I shouldn't let out, but I will.
Tea.
Is that we are all winging it. Like as far as like the music industry is changing, has been changing, will always change so much. It's a very fluid industry. And so I'd say that the really important people are the ones that are like, so this is like, I have this experience perhaps, but things keep changing. Those are the people that are like, well, listen to them, because they've kind of got a really clear idea about the truth of it. And my people so often didn't have the background in music industry, but what they had was the willingness to learn. And I think willingness to learn is something that will, transcend any prior experience or professionalism or anything like that, because you're always learning, and that's a much better ethos.
I like that a lot. I have so many questions to ask you, but for now,
you can cut me off anytime.
No, you go on some really amazing tangents, and I'm like, is anybody taking notes? Shall I? There are some amazing questions from the audience, and I'm going to rattle off a few now. Nicola had asked, a lot of your songs are environmentally charged. Have you got any tips for us on living a more sustainable lifestyle?
Where's Nicola? Hi, Nicola. How are you? Don't be a musician.
Oh, yeah.
That's the first step, is don't be a musician. I'm just not in a position, I don't think, to say, because my efforts are a lot to combat the fact that I have a crazy carbon footprint comparative to anybody else, for a start. I think something I probably learned from my parents, who I'm really so lucky to have in my life. My dad always really encouraged, he made this example to me at some point about, I was talking to him about, responsible ways to manage forestry, for example, and how to, and he was like, okay, so at this point, are you willing to be the person who's going to kick off the farmer off the land, or the person who's managing this woods because they're not doing it right? Or what if in 10 years' time, after you think that this was the best wood, like this was, bamboo was it? I think bamboo was the example. He's like, what if it turns out that that isn't actually the right thing and you need to change? And his point was that it's really hard to do anything but have, again, an openness to learn, and be really concerned about the facts. And I think on a personal level, something I've been considering lately is how can the best thing I can do is talk about what I consider to be important on stage, because for some reason I'm on stage and I'm not a scientist, I'm not qualified, but there's people who may listen. And so for me, it's to just speak about what I'm passionate about. And I think that if someone is passionate about humanitarian rights over environmental stuff, do that. Find out what's unique and how you can contribute, because there isn't one way. I think that and if you ask the questions, you might have better answers than I do. So that's what I'd say. Yeah.
Got another amazing question from Charlotte. She asked, you seem to have a lot of self-awareness and emotional intelligence. I agree. Do you find that helps contribute to your authentic music and lyrics?
It drives me mad. Outside of that, yes, I'd say that probably. Where are you in the crowd? Hello. Hello.
Yeah.
How I'd say that it's my kind of processing. It's the way I process what I'm going through in my own little weird universe. So I'd say that, yeah, it does. It is the foundation for the lyrics for sure, and it's often a very selfish endeavor. It's just because I'm trying to figure out and express what's going on. But I've found that in doing that, you also resonate with people on that level in the crowd, and so it's just kind of like this wonderful, loop of really good things when you do. So yeah.
Yeah, so your emotional intelligence informs the lyrics inform the response informs the emotional intelligence. We're getting somewhere.
Can you draw that for me after this?
Honestly, visually, I have it. I just need that pen and paper I asked for. Just describe.
Yeah, we don't need this here. What we need is like a whiteboard, and then we can start. Yeah, between us. I'd say lastly, just that I'd say through songwriting, I'm trying to grow like my emotional intelligence. I'd say that if I could be emotionally intelligent for myself, then maybe I'd just be swimming with dolphins all the time, So it's a learning thing for me.
The end goal. We've got a few online questions that are anonymous. Sorry about that. When you're not being an innovative environmental activist, melodic pioneer, incredible. What do you like to do for fun? What are your hobbies?
Poetry.
Yeah.
Legitimately, I'd say that's probably as far as a hobby goes. Which again, it's just like the amount of cliches that my life is sometimes like makes me cringe, and that's me.
Don't be too hard about it. It's okay.
I'd say probably again just because I didn't know, I just stumbled into it by accident. Like I was doing lyrics, and sure, that's kind of like it is kind of like poetry, but specifically, I'd say the last couple of years I've been really getting into just doing poetry again because it's something separate to making a song, right. Which is now like I make a song and I'm considering if it gets released. Whereas at first it was like I was making songs just because I was writing songs because I was an emotional little boy. And so I'd say probably poetry is one of my biggest hobbies. That's, hasn't got something to do with a career right now.
Which is super important.
Yeah, something outside of it. This is what I talked about with a buddy, Kim Churchill. We were talking about things you do outside of, your career time. And also not being for something, like I didn't go, I'm going to write some poetry because I can do this. It was like I just was doing it for myself. I'd say, poetry, time of family, yoga. I've been pretty on it this year, and that's just because there's so much transit and it's really hard to stay like music. In the way my music is pretty physically engaging, and so... Yeah, poetry, yoga, just if you just kind of go to cliches of singer-songwriter, surfer thing, then we'll find all the answers there.
Look, you have to go to drag yourself where someone else does. Get to it before the comments do. No. Aaron's asked, what's your most memorable show to date? Do you have any amazing stories to share? That's a tough one because if you're doing 120, you did, an Australian tour last year. You've been performing for like 4 or 5 years, if not more.
I will because I think it's an excellent question. I have so many memorable shows. It's hard to. It's like I have so many incredible shows. Most shows blow me away. Yeah. Which is not something that every artist can say. I'll tell like a story about it because we're in Sydney right now. I'm going to tell a story about a Sydney experience from a couple of years ago, which I've told at shows, but I think it's a really cool one to tell here. At Build, I was doing the Sydney show early on. This must have been 2015. Might have been like, again, March, April. I kind of go to like my socials and they have like on this day. And it's just creepy. I'm always doing shows every year, all the time. It's like this repetitive day.
Groundhog Day.
Yeah, Groundhog Day. Thank you. I did this one show in Sydney, and it must have been somewhere at the start of the year in 2015, and I was due to play this venue. A little venue, but it didn't have an indoor option, and it was going to be raining. And so it kind of called me up because I was doing my own bookings at the time. And they were like, we can't host your show. And I was like, thank you. I'm in Sydney anyway. I didn't mean to drive to Sydney for this.
Yeah, all good if not bad.
All good if not. And, and I took it seriously because I think, there was maybe 70 people who were coming who'd bought tickets. And I was like, wow. So I called up my buddy, Matt, and I was like, hey, do you have... He's the guy I called. He was my mate that I called when like something was up, and he's like, "I got you covered." So he's called around everywhere. So he's in Cronulla and found a yoga studio, which I loved the idea of, obviously.
Incredible.
And what a perfect fit. And so everyone takes off their shoes. We've loaded in. I'm like, this is perfect. And we are about to play the show, and somebody, my buddy gets a call, and the person who's offered to us in the first place says, if everyone doesn't get out in 15 minutes, the police are coming. Just kind of, I don't know to this day, but I go get cash out. I'm like, we have to cancel the show. We've tried 2 venues. It hasn't worked out. And I go up and I'm like, guys, like, we're just getting kicked out. It's none of your fault. Like, just going to give you money back. And someone from the back of the crowd, I think her name was Heidi, and she was like, we'll host it. And I kind of like looked at her, I was like, really? She's like, yeah, how far is your house? Like, 2 blocks over. People, the whole crowd was helping getting the gear down the stairs.
Stop it.
It's bucketing. It's pouring rain. There's random people in my van, like, passing the parcel with all the gear. Everyone runs over to 2 or 3 streets away, and we unpack, we set up again. It's by this time it's like 9 p.m. and the show still happened. And I think like that's just for me was like such a triumphant moment, and it was a real example of how much like my career is a we, I think, and that's something that's special about the feeling. It's like it's not me in the crowd. It's like I feel like particularly with my grassroots, being fairly grassroots in the way I've broken through, it's always been a feeling of we, like when we achieve something, and that was one of those moments that like was a perfect example of that.
I want to be the Heidi in any space. The person that's like, I'll do it.
Heidi in that moment,
I'll step it up. I want to be the person who helps out.
Her roommates didn't love her, but we love her for it.
She's made a memory. That's like a good memory. I'm going to internalize like it was my own experience. Like I'm getting a little bit watery, a bit teary.
But those are the things that you kind of can't fabricate, and those are the things that you should pursue. And now things are at a point where they aren't necessarily so ad lib as that, you know, but that's the sort of things that I think as an artist you can't trade. There's nothing like that, and that's not something you can't do with the 5,000 people that come to Hordern Pavilion. You can't just casually change a venue, and that's something that's really special, and why you shouldn't rush away from those moments when there is only 20, 30, 15, 70 people in the crowd, because those sort of things happen, and they are like your lifetime memories. Absolutely.
Our lifetime memories.
Our lifetime, yeah.
I'm going to give you 2 rapid fire questions because we've got the call that it's time to go. But the first one I want to know is, do you ever get nervous on stage?
Definitely. Last time I was really nervous before getting on stage was Splendor, and I was like full shakes, heart beating so hard in your chest, and so I still do get nervous, and I just usually after a song or 2, I'm good. It goes away.
Yeah. And the very last one, if you could collaborate with anybody on anything, I'm presuming music, who would it be?
Rapid fire question. Who would it be?
I thought you'd have this one on top, just ready to go. Hand it to someone in the team. Dad, next up.
Who would it be? The person I would really like to collaborate with, I can't share at this point.
Because it's happening.
I can't say yet, but that's my answer.
Just blink twice.
No comment.
Okay, well, if for that reason, we're going to do another question because I feel like that's warranted.
Because we're rapid.
Sorry to the higher-ups. Let's do this one. Someone online submitted a question saying that they heard you were very passionate about the fight for the Bight, and if you could speak more on that.
Yeah, definitely. The fight for the Bight, so again, if people aren't aware, it's become quite an international topic, which is fantastic. In the Great Australian Bight, covering from South Australia to Western Australia, there is proposed deep sea drilling. The company is called Equinor. I don't really focus too much on that because everyone wants to kind of get on, it's this company. No company can safely drill in those waters. Like the reason why, it's one of the most rugged coastlines in the world. They're planning to deep sea drill. It's explorative. It's one of the deepest drills ever, for example, compared to what happened in the Gulf of Mexico. That was in calm waters. This is in where, like, one of my favorite places to surf in the world, with waves way bigger than I'll ever surf kind of thing. It's one of the wildest coastlines in the world. To top it off, there is no feasible cleanup effort. With an oil spill, you actually can't clean it up. Like, there's just dispersants that push it to the bottom. I could continue on, but the moral of the story is that the projected oil spill by the company themselves, if there were to be one, would cover half of Australia's coastline. That says enough, but it would cover half of Australia's coastline, and the not just environmental, because like sure, I love the fact there's whales. It's a whale breeding ground, but that doesn't matter to some people. People don't necessarily all have that connection, and I respect that. But the way it affects the stakeholders, the businesses, the local communities, the way it affects the Australian economy as a whole, like it would be a blow that it just would change it would change what we are as Australians. It would change what our country is so loved for, and it would change so much, perhaps irreversibly. So we're actually doing a paddle out. It's a National Day of Action, so I happen to, thank goodness, be in Sydney for the paddle out tomorrow. There's a paddle out here at Bondi Beach, but you can go online. There's 50 paddle outs around Australia, and if you want to show, because the really beautiful thing is it's been pushed back. There's one more. They're trying to apply yet again, but there has, as far as I know, not been such a big action of such a big protest around like an environmental issue. We've had the ongoing ones with the Great Barrier Reef, but this has united all Australians in such an incredible way, and really, I think, sprouted this wonderful new phase of activism. So yeah, we're just going to have to kind of show that it's not something we stand for, and it could be some really exciting days ahead when it is pushed back because the Australian public is speaking out.
Thank you so much for sharing that, because I know it's hard to ask of you to tell us more and where to find information and what can we do, but it does help when it comes from, a voice or a mouthpiece that someone might resonate with. So,
and I'd say just lastly, like, I don't care because I'm a surfer. I care because I do care not just about the beach being clean, but I do care about like Australian, like our country and our economy as well. So it affects everybody, not just the hippie in me.
And on that note, thank you so much for coming to Build. Please get up for Ziggy.
Thank you very much.
And make sure you check out Intentions and stream Laps Around the Sun.